if you say, well, then in what sense are you Jewish? I don't believe it's a biological group. That's Hitler's position. That's Hitler's position. As Sand says, if you believe that Hitler has won, that you're biologically Jewish.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 427. I'm talking to Sheldon Richman. Sheldon has long been a libertarian scholar. He's worked at Cato. He was an editor at the Foundation for Economic Education. He's worked for the Future of Freedom Foundation, and he's also been at offices within the Libertarian Party, although I don't think any of those ones were paid. How are you, Sheldon?
I'm fine. Yeah. You're bringing to light the fact that I had trouble holding a job. I worked for many libertarian organizations, some of them even defunct, like Inquiry Magazine.
And yeah, I knew about Inquiry Magazine. The fact that you stuck around with it as long as you did is also
well. I couldn't do anything else.
You know, and you've got a few books, and one of your more famous books is Coming to Palestine, which people often recommend as a way to look at the entire Israel-Palestine conflict. Yeah. So tell me, Sheldon, how do you think this? I guess really we can go back and start with Theodore Herzl and Zionism, but when was really the first shots fired in what we would call modern Israel, or before it was officially modern Israel?
The first shots fired.
Yeah.
Well, there was violence from the early 20th century onward, on and off. Some of it coming from the Arab side when land was bought from an absentee landlord, and then the people who had worked it for generations, their families, and had lived there for generations, and I would call them the Lockean owners, because the feudal owners, I don't think were true owners. There was resentment that people who had worked that land for so many years and lived there were thrown off by some parts of the Zionist movement, the Zionist settlers, because they had this idea that they were redeeming the land in the name of the Jewish people, and only Jews could work on it. So some would cheat that the others and hire Arabs, but that was really frowned on, and most of them did not hire Arabs. So there was resentment, and unfortunately, and sometimes Arabs would take that out. Arabs within Palestine, Palestinian Arabs, would take that out on innocent Jews. And that, of course, that's to be condemned. That's bad, but it's not. It didn't happen in a vacuum. I'm not excusing it. So early 20th century onward, there is friction and violence and outright shooting. Of course, really like 47 to 48 when there's the war, especially after because the groups like the Irgun and the Stern Gang, Lehi, these were militias. You could even call them terrorist groups that tried to terrorize Palestinian Arabs so that they would leave, because you can't, they understood that you couldn't have a Jewish state if you have a lot of Arabs in that state. At least that's how they saw it. And so, this is well documented even by historians who defended, the new historians of Israel, like Benny Morris. They drove, before the war even occurred, that 250,000 Palestinians had to leave their land, and not because the Arab leaders told them to leave. That's a myth that was debunked many times, beginning in the 60s or maybe 50s. But so total, I think 750,000 Palestinian Arabs were driven from their homes as a result of the turmoil in 47 to 48 after the British left and Ben-Guiron and his group declared independence in May of 1948. So you asked about the shooting. So that's when the shooting actually occurs.
Yeah, well, just when the violence started. So were these mostly just sharecroppers or tenant farmers, or were they outright property owners who were getting kicked off?
Well, it was. Don't forget, Palestine and that whole area, the neighboring countries, were all part of the Ottoman Empire, which means the Turks, for something like 400 years. So when the Turks had been on Germany's side in World War I, and so when that side, the Axis powers, lost, the Ottoman Empire was dismantled by the British and the French. The Russians by then had undergone the Russian Revolution, so they were out of it. So mainly the British and the French. Wilson was at the Woodrow Wilson was at the peace conference. So I lost the train of thought of your question because I gave that little preface there. Remind me again what you were asking.
Were these like
sharecroppers,
tenant farmers, or were they actually own the land?
So Palestinian Arabs, and we have much evidence showing they go back to ancient Judea. In other words, they are the descendants, along with other groups that came in and mixed, and like the Arabs when they came centuries later. They have their roots in biblical times, ancient Judea, even though their families converted to Christianity, a lot of them, and then to Islam. So they had worked that land and lived on that land, not just as sharecroppers, or not just as farmers, or what they call them, the fellahin, but also as merchants. They owned shops in Jerusalem and other places. The Jaffa orange was very famous and was exported worldwide beginning in like 1850. So people knew whose land was whom. They would say, "Oh, that's Muhammad's grove over there, and that's so and so's grove over there." But there was a big family, especially of Lebanese, who had been given basically title to a whole lot of land by the Ottoman Turks when it was still in power to settle a debt. They owed money to this, I think it was called the Sursak family or something like that. They lived in Lebanon. And they had lent a lot of money to the Turks. The government couldn't pay it back, so they said, well, why don't we just assign the title of all this land, which it didn't have any kind of libertarian right to do, right? But it was the Turkish government, so they said they could do it, to this family. So that family was the owner of record, not the. And when I say Lockean, of course I mean John Locke, just for the listeners. Yeah. These were the people who lived and worked the land, but the official title given to this family that didn't even live in Palestine came from the feudal government of the Ottoman Turks. So once that was overthrown and dismantled, and the British now were in control under the mandate system, right? They had a mandate system for Palestine. So we're talking about the early 20s now. So after the war ends in 1918. Zionist groups and the Jewish National Fund was buying the title from the absentee family, and then throwing the people off the land, saying you can't work here. This is now our land, and we're only hiring Jews. Like I said, there were some exceptions. We're only hiring Jews. So people who had their roots, family roots in that land, were suddenly tossed off, and that created a lot of resentment. And there were what they call Jewish cultural Zionists at that time, who were coinciding with the Herzl, Ben-Guiron, more militant types, saying this is no way to treat the Arabs. This is going to cause a lot of trouble in the future. And I'm talking about people like a guy who wrote under the name of Ahad Ha'am, means like one of the people. His real name was Azar Ginsburg. He wrote passionate articles about to his fellow Zionists. He was a cultural Zionist, to the political Zionists. You are creating such animosity in the Arabs. I mean, the Palestinian Arabs, not Arabs in the neighboring countries, the Palestinians, that this is crazy. Stop doing this. And others like Judah Magnus, who was one of the founders and first chancellor of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, was in this cultural Zionist camp saying, stop this arrogant, dismissive attitude toward the Palestinian Arabs, because that is not even going to serve our interests, because we're creating such hostility. So there was dissent. I like to point out that Jewish anti-Zionism, and let me repeat that, Jewish anti-Zionism is as old as Jewish Zionism. because the moment Herzl started talking about it, there were Jewish critics saying, this is crazy. You don't go back and try to undo 2,000 years of history and say, we're coming back. Everybody out of here. Thanks for watching the place, but your services are no longer required. We're back. That's crazy. That's going to create violence and turmoil. That's not going to make the Jewish people safe. And do I need to tell people that their prophecy was right?
Yeah. Well, Sheldon, this is why I think Zionism is just so unbelievably absurd. We have 2 parents, we have 4 grandparents, we have 8 great-grandparents. If you go back 1,000 years, we have thousands of ancestors, and yet I'm going to somehow claim that I have a right to a land that was owned by one of them. I mean, that to me is just idiotic.
Right.
I don't even know. I mean, probably most people in Europe and in the Americas can probably have an ancestor who once lived in Israel.
Right. A couple of points here. Yeah, I guess that means there's a population implosion, right? Because you have all these people coming down to you. It's shrinking. Population shrinking. But that's a side point. Ben-Guiron in 1918 wrote a book. It's never been translated into English, but I've read excerpts that have been translated. He wrote a book, and I forget the title. And his co-author was someone who was a demographer who became the 2nd president of Israel after Chaim Weizmann died, I guess. I guess he died in office or retired, one or the other. So they wrote a book together in 1918, so pretty early, right? 1918, they put out a book saying the Palestinian Arabs are our brethren. They go back to ancient Judea, pre-Roman times. And so there's a line. He then dropped that when it wasn't very well received, I guess. So the only place you can read about that book that I'm aware of is in Shlomo Sand's book, very good book, The Invention of the Jewish People. So if anybody's curious about this Ben-Gurion book, read the Sand book. But here's the point. Before the Romans even got to Judea, which is sometime in the 2nd century BCE. Okay, we're not into the CE time yet. There were already thriving Jewish communities all around the Mediterranean. The most famous, I guess, was Alexandria in Egypt. Philo, the Jewish philosopher, thriving community. Maimonides later on, when he has to flee Spain, he stops in Palestine, but where does he end up? He ends up in Cairo. In other words, so there were Jewish or Judeans all around the Mediterranean and in the Roman Empire. And according to along the Silk Road, they were traders. They traded along the Silk Road and into Europe itself. So here's the irony: the descendants of Judeans who voluntarily, they weren't exiled; they left for trading opportunities and better lives. So here's the irony: the descendants in 1918 or so of Judeans who voluntarily left Judea and went north and west, are now trying to throw out the descendants of people who did not leave Palestine. That's ironic. The descendants of people who chose to leave are now trying to kick in the 20th century, trying to kick out people who are descendants of people that did not leave.
Yes,
did not want to leave and did not leave.
It's like the Judean People's Front versus the People's Front of Judea.
That's a great movie, by the way. They did a lot of research on that movie, believe me.
Monty Python's.
No, let me make it clear, because I'm sure most people haven't looked at my book, but I invite them to look at it and get it, from Amazon, because I won't say it's unique, but I think it's rare because it's a libertarian take on the Palestinian cause. Yeah. Most of the time it's left wing, what we call left wing, anti-West, anti-capitalist, and so mine is not that. I was brought up what you call a mild Zionist. My family weren't planning to move to Israel, but they gave money to Israel. They visited Israel. They loved Israel. It was really the second country. And so I was brought up in that. I changed my position through reading, beginning in the late 70s. So I just want to give my credentials, right? I don't start. I mean, I have a Jewish background. I was bar mitzvahed. I'm not into religion. Long ago, I abandoned religion altogether in favor of reason, I might say. But but I want to give people the context, right? I didn't just in case they think, well, he's, you get called all kinds of names if you're critical of Israel.
Yeah. Sheldon, I agree, and I have to say, I don't think a lot of these people do the anti-Zionists any good at all by fusing it with this anti-West, anti-civilization. And as far as I'm concerned, Islam is anti-civilization. I've been to Malaysia, which seems like a reasonably civilized country, but that's about it.
But that's isn't it? Well, no, Indonesia, I guess, is the biggest Muslim country.
But I don't know.
But I've known Muslims. I've known libertarian Muslims.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Who are active Muslims, not ex-Muslims.
But if you're putting people in jail for blasphemy, your country is not civilized.
Oh no, that's not. Those are not free countries. I totally agree.
Yeah. Dubai is not civilized as far as I'm concerned. I don't care how many big buildings they have.
Yeah, no.
I'm not defending about what happened to people who go there. It's
no, I'm definitely not defending that. Look, I'm not a fan of religion, period.
Yeah.
And it seems like Islam, for the most part, has not gone through a reformation or a modernization the way Christianity and Judaism did. I mean, there was a Jewish Enlightenment, Moses Mendelssohn and the people in Germany after that. Halaska, I guess it's called, the Jewish Enlightenment. So Islam didn't seem to do that. I mean, it had days when it was, long ago, when it was much more vibrant and open. When it closed off, that's when the problems occurred. That's true of China. That's been true of India. You have these thriving civilizations long ago, and then for some reason they turn inward and they don't want any outside influence. They cut themselves off, and then they deteriorate into tyranny or something like that.
Yeah.
Luckily, the West did not do that.
Yeah. Just looking at all the great mathematicians who came from that area, things like the University of Baghdad. And of course, Jews weren't just in Israel. I mean, they spread out over, they've lived in Iran for thousands of years, Iraq, even up into the Caucasus region. I mean, those are probably all Jews.
And there were a lot of conversions too. I want to put that on the record. Although, in Sand details the conversions that happened, even back in the time of the Maccabees, and then later on. But even without putting conversions into the story, there still were Judeans, not converts, Judeans who had moved and spread north and west and had vibrant centers. Again, Alexandria, Egypt being probably the most famous. And so we understand that. According to Sand, I mean, people generally believe that in 70 AD or BC or Common Era CE, the Romans, after the revolt by the Judeans, the Jews, exiled the Jews from not just Jerusalem, but Palestine. And there you get the wandering Jew. That's supposedly the origin of the diaspora. According to Sand, who's a historian at Tel Aviv University, I think he's retired now, that's not what the Romans did. They didn't kick, and that's not what they typically did. They didn't go into a place and kick everybody out and bring their own people in. So it wasn't settler colonialism. They needed the taxpayers. They needed the farmers. They left them there. They took away some leaders, the troublemakers, right? They don't like rebels. They took them away. That's why we get the Arch of Titus, in Rome, where it shows them parading with the menorah and all that. But they left people there by and large. And those people then later became Christians and then Muslims. They converted. They just kind of went with the flow, their kids and their grandkids all the way down. So they never did. And we know they didn't kick them out in 70 because in 163, there was another rebellion by the Judeans led by Bar Kokhba against the Romans. Well, how could there be, if they got kicked out in 70, how'd they have another uprising in 163? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So you talk, this Lebanese family. So the Ottomans just took land from the Arabs who were living there and gave it to the.
Well, they didn't. It's not. They took the title. They didn't really take the land.
Oh, they took the title.
They just look the I think it's called Sursak, the family, and I believe they live in. They were in Lebanon. They weren't even in Palestine. They had lent a lot of money to to the Ottoman regime, and the Ottoman regime was, wasn't it called like the sick man of Europe? It had been declining for a while, even before the World War One. So they said, look, how about if we give you a title to all this, a whole bunch of land in Palestine? Will that settle the debt? And the Sursaks said, yeah, that'll settle the debt. So in other words, they were the owner of record of a lot of that land. And the Lockean owners, the people, the tillers of the soil, right? That's the Lockean owner, person that mixed their labor, the homesteaders, basically. They were screwed. So the Sursaks then sold, and they got criticism at the time. They were selling land to the Jewish National Fund and other individual Jews, the Rothschilds and others, who wanted to establish a Jewish state in Palestine.
So the Ottoman Empire had always really been the owner of the land, or? Well,
as a feudal regime, it did claim everything, right? It claimed everything, I guess. But I don't know that the farmers were paying rent to the Ottoman regime. I don't really know that level of detail. Maybe not. Maybe they probably. Oh, they were paying taxes. Maybe they. I don't know if they called it rent. They paid taxes, I'm sure.
Well, it almost sounds like maybe it was an Amon Bundy type of situation. I mean,
no, it is the case. Just to be fair, as I understand it, some individual farmers did sell land. It wasn't all that family. So there were some cases. But look, by 1948, Jewish organizations and individuals owned, including the Sursak stuff, owned under 7% of Palestine. This is in 1948. They had only acquired through purchases under 7% of the land. So it's not like they went in. You will hear people say, wait a second, they bought the land. What are you talking about? They had a right to turn it into a Jewish state. They bought the land. Not if it was 6 point something percent of the land.
Yeah.
And
So 7%, at the founding of Israel, what happened after that? So.
Well, you then get, of course, there's the violence because you have the Irgun, you have Ben-Guiron. He's the main line, and they have the Haganah, Palmach, which is a military group. This is informal. There's not a state yet. You also have then Menachem Begin's group and Yitzhak Shamir, both of whom went on to be prime ministers, even though they were terrorists. They had groups that were very violent. They wanted all of Palestine. In fact, they wanted more than Palestine. They wanted to go from the Nile in Egypt to the Euphrates in today's Iraq. They really wanted it expansive. And some of them wanted up to the Litani River in Lebanon, which in recent years, Israel has occupied. It finally left. But that's really greater Israel. In fact, and they wanted what became Transjordan. They wanted Transjordan too, which is now today called Jordan. So they were really aiming at a very large piece of real estate in the Middle East. And they used violence to get it. They also used diplomacy when possible. Some of them are more pragmatic. Ben-Guiron was maybe a little more on the pragmatic side, but he endorsed transfer. In 1937, they're talking about we got to transfer the Arabs because we can't have a Jewish state with all these Arabs. How can they have a Jewish state? Now, you and I challenge the very idea of there being a Jewish state, an exclusivist Jewish state. But that was the official Zionist position.
Yeah, it raises the question. Yeah, but obviously, if you don't, it's almost like you. But it seems like to me a lot of this just was outright land theft. Is that correct or not?
Well, if they drove what I consider the real owners, the tillers of the soil for many generations off, and they had a policy of we can only hire Jewish labor, then that sounds like land theft to me. And if they had paid money, apparently a lot of money, to absentee landlords who were feudal landlords, right? They weren't the real owners because they hadn't worked the land. They never worked the land. They got it, like I said, through a settlement of debts with the old Ottoman regime before it fell apart. That sounds like land theft to me. And then they also acquired land by driving Palestinians out. 500 villages had disappeared by the time things were over in 48 and 49 through that war. And the Arabs, the Palestinians were not told by Arab leaders in the surrounding countries to leave. That's the old myth too. They left. The Arab countries were ready to go in and pounce on the Jews, right? So they told the Palestinian Arabs, get out. We're going to go in. Well, first of all, even if that's true, you're still the owner. Why don't you have a right to go back in? But it's not even true, because in the 60s, early 60s, journalists went through all the BBC broadcasts and the other local broadcasts. There were no radio broadcasts of Arab leaders saying to the Palestinians, leave, you'll be able to, after the war, you can come back, leave now. They were not told to leave. In fact, they were urged to stay. So there's a lot of mythology around the founding of Israel. And also, let's not leave the UN out of this. In 1947, Britain said, because there was a lot of violence both on all sides, but the King David Hotel was blown up by Begin's group. People were killed. Civilians were killed.
Yeah, that was against the British, not against the Palestinians. Yeah,
because the British government was as headquarters. They wanted to drive the British out, and then they worry about the Palestinians. The British finally said to the UN, "Hey, we're giving up the mandate." It was like basically a colony. They called it a mandate after World War I. So they said, "We're getting out of here in a year." They gave them a year. This is like November of 1947. So then in November 47, the UN General Assembly, not the Security Council, passes a recommendation. It's very important. That word is very important because people don't realize, they think that the UN partitioned Palestine into a Jewish state and a Arab state, Palestinian Arab state. It had no power to do that in its bylaws. It was not allowed to partition land. It recommended to the Security Council, and I suppose to the British too, who was on this Security Council, it recommended partition. That's all it was. It was a recommendation, which never was taken up by the Security Council. In 1948, in May, Ben-Guiron and his committee declared independence. Even though there were nearly half of the Jewish part of the partition recommendation were Palestinian Arabs. And so the Zionists weren't happy with that almost half the population, how do you have a Jewish state if almost half the population, and they had a lot of kids, if only half the population was Jewish, and almost half, the other half was Palestinian. Something had to be done. And transfer and various other things. And they used terror. Benny Morris, who's a complete defender of Israel and Zionism, still has written history laying out what happened, and it's not very flattering to the Zionist militias. Benny Morris has even found documents saying that those militia groups poisoned the wells of some of the Palestinian villagers to get them to leave. Now, that sounds like one of those 19th century protocols of the elders of Zion kind of thing, doesn't it? Like, poisoned wells, sure, that's mythology from the czars. And Benny Morris found the document in the paper, in the official papers. You can find it online. You can find the whole story online. It was reported in the papers, I don't know, a couple decades ago. They actually poisoned wells. They massacred people. Deir Yassin is maybe the famous name of a village that then disappeared near Jerusalem, where a whole bunch of people were murdered for no reason. It was considered even a friendly village before that time. So terrible atrocities were committed. And like I said, 750,000 Palestinian Arabs left their homes, either driven away or scared away or otherwise pressured to leave. That's how we have Israel. And then in 67, they took the rest of it.
Yeah, so if you have people selling in situations like that, you can't really say that the sale was consensual. If they're afraid, well, my neighbors.
Yeah, no, I don't think those are. I mean, it's a point that will be lost on most people, right? You and I understand the term distinguishing the Lockean owner from a feudal owner of record. You and I will understand that, and I hope a lot of libertarians will. But for other people, they don't even know what you're talking about. It's like you're speaking Greek or something. Or Arab.
Yeah, I don't understand. There's so much. there's so much cherry picking of facts on this whole issue that it seems impossible to know what really happens there.
It's very emotional. No, it is emotional, and I don't take any joy in kind of making this case. Israel's now been around, 75 years or so, 76 years. People have, been born there, been living there. There is an Israeli culture that has grown up over all that time, music, Israeli culture. Notice I didn't say Jewish culture, because there are many Jewish cultures. A Jew who was brought up in Baghdad, and I can name one, Avi Shlaim, very worthwhile author and lecturer, and he calls himself an Arab Jew. He and his family are from Baghdad, and as a 5-year-old, he was brought to Israel. But his culture is very different from a Polish Jews or a Russian Jew or Ukrainian Jews culture. They didn't eat the same food. They didn't listen to the same music. Now, if they were religious, they had religion in common, the same kind of Hebrew prayer book and holidays. So that's religious culture. But there's no secular Jewish culture. There are many cultures that contain Jewish people that aren't religious. So I'm talking about food, music, theater, all the stuff we mean by culture. And so there's not one, I don't understand what a secular Jew is exactly, because they're not religious. They say they're not religious. I mean, there are Jews who say they're atheists and who don't practice the practices, do the rituals. If you say, well, then in what sense are you Jewish? I don't believe it's a biological group. That's Hitler's position. That's Hitler's position. As Sand says, if you believe that, Hitler has won, that you're biologically Jewish. Can a person stop being Jewish? There are some people who say, no, you can't stop it. That's Hitler's position. You can't ever not be Jewish. It's blood. It's genes. So he didn't know about genes, I guess, but it's blood. I don't buy that. It's religion. It's belief and practices. And if you can abandon those, and then I think, Sand also wrote a book called Why I Stopped Being Jewish, because he wanted to make this point. So I take no joy in this, because, look, Jews have had a rough time in Europe through the centuries, even before the Holocaust. And then you have the Holocaust on top of that. It doesn't mean every part of Europe was always constantly, bad for the Jews. In different places, it was at different times. It's kind of a very uneven. It's like lumpy mashed potatoes. It's not one homogeneous thing. And then you have the terrible, of course, the Nazis. Terrible. So for Jews to want to get out of Europe, I totally understand. They should have come to America. We should have Roosevelt should have struck down the 1924, immigration quota law that Calvin Coolidge signed, the son of a gun, saying we need to keep America American.
Yeah.
Some libertarians really like Calvin Coolidge, but I hope they don't like him for that. So they should have been coming here, and most of them would have wanted to come here. They didn't want to go to Palestine. Why do they want? You don't want to go from Europe to Palestine. They weren't farmers. They didn't want to be in that kind of, it was much more foreign than coming to America. So it's a tragic story, and I'm totally sympathetic to wanting to, I'll even sympathize with Herzl saying we got to do something. Herzl's first idea was to have all the Austrian Jews and Hungarian Jews convert to Catholicism. That was his first plan. The Catholic Church said no thanks. So then he went to Plan B, Zionism.
Wow. Yeah. So, and unfortunately too, I think Hungarians also have a long history of being prejudiced against Jews.
Certainly, look, there was certainly anti-Semitism based on a lot of things. And, Thomas Sowell has a lot of interesting things to say about this. It's not only, and maybe in many cases, not predominantly, the crucifixion of Jesus. That sounds like usually the reason, right? These were the Christ killers, but that wasn't always the cause of the animosity. That might have been added on. Thomas Sowell explains it as prejudice against the middleman minority. And other groups have also suffered. Jews were peddlers, retailers. They were brokers, right? What do brokers do? They match up somebody who has a demand and someone who has a supply. They were money lenders, and I don't say that in a bad sense. That's lending money is a totally constructive thing. And so they were hated because people who are ignorant of economics always think the middleman doesn't do anything. Why is he making money and more and richer than I am when all he does is move things around? I mean, that's kind of the ignorant way to look at a middleman. If he's also of a different ethnic group or religion from you, you pile that on. Oh yeah, those rich middlemen and that, Jew. But it's not just Jews, because as Sol points out, the overseas Chinese suffered the same situation in Southeast Asia. They were entrepreneurs, they were brokers, money lenders, and all that. And there were massacres of overseas Chinese in Southeast Asia. He says, a lot of people will say the Chinese were the Jews of Asia. He says you could also say that the Jews were the Chinese of Europe. And there were other groups. The Indians in Africa came in and were entrepreneurs and middlemen. They suffered discrimination and worse. And so did the Lebanese in Western Africa. They played the same role in the economy, and they were advancing the economy and also getting richer than the people around them. And people hated them, and they said, "Oh, did you notice they're from India too? Not only are they richer, they're from India." And so that's an old story. And Sol, you could look at Sol's stuff on migration and culture and conquest and culture. His great books on stuff like that. He explains it. This is it's understandable. I mean, that's not kind of a weird explanation.
Well, class warfare didn't start with Karl Marx, unfortunately. Yeah, it often is a. Although, as I pointed out, sometimes it's not necessarily that people are successful, but it's how they act when they are successful. It's, after you see a football team win the big game, they go by and they shake hands with the other team. But if they start, taunting them and making fun of them, it's another thing. But and that's not saying anybody either side's done that, but yeah, it's certainly. But what I was also saying too, people forget that when the mass killings actually started in 1941, almost all the Jews were out of Germany anyway. The Germans had a lot of collaborators in the country that they invaded in the Holocaust.
Yeah, and the number of German Jews was not very large. Actually, I don't remember the number now, but certainly nowhere near 6 million. Right, the bulk of the Jews that were murdered by the Nazis were further east, Poland, and all the way, Ukraine and into Russia. There weren't enough Jews in Germany. Some had gotten out because they saw the handwriting on the wall, but the Jews in Germany before the Nazis really loved Germany. They saw themselves as German citizens, and they really loved Germany. When they didn't want to leave. Maybe they were short-sighted, but given their life up till then, they thought, "Oh, come on, it's not really going to get dangerous." When Eric Remarque, the guy who wrote All Quiet on the Western Front, Eric Marie Remarque, he left. Now he wasn't Jewish, but when he left to get out because he saw the Nazis coming along, people asked him, like, "How could you have left Germany?" And he said, "What do you think? I'm Jewish?" In other words, the Jews were so in love with Germany that they were the ones reluctant to leave. The non-Jewish Germans, some of them were really, ready to get out of there the moment they got a whiff of the Nazis. And so I thought that was an interesting remark. Now, it's a complicated history, and it's also true. There was a book called Esau's Tears by Albert Lindemann. That's very interesting. It's a thick book, and it's about the history of modern anti-Semitism in I guess Europe. And some Jews were tax collectors and rent collectors for the Tsarist regimes, which did not make them very popular with regular people, right, who had to pay the taxes. And unfortunately, they took that work. They should have avoided that. Nobody likes a tax collector. So that gets folded into it, right? There's a lot of issues going on. And no way am I blaming Jews for anti-Semitism, but Jews were also at the forefront of what you could call the capitalist revolution as things get going in the 19th century, there are Jews that were entrepreneurs and setting up businesses, and the world is changing. It's changing in a liberal direction, in a capitalist direction, and a lot of people don't like change. And so they resented Jews who seem to be very visible figures in this transition that was going on all around them. But, we know that people don't like change. I think one reason people don't like immigration is because they don't like change. And yet you can't freeze change, because you have to violate people's liberty to keep change from happening. Change is what people do. You're going to have to control them. So there's all that folded into it. It's complicated, and I don't even, I don't claim that I understand it, and I don't think anybody perfectly understands it. But Lindemann's book is quite enlightening.
Yeah, and I certainly don't think we can discount all the amazing Jewish contributions to science and medicine and other things like that. I mean,
right, and I would say that's not genetic. Some people might want to argue it's genetic. That's because families pass that down. Dedication to learning, scholarship, stuff like that, and different cultures are different. I mean, Thomas Sowell likes to point out that how come in every country in the world that has a piano industry, even in South America, Germans dominate that industry. It's just something that gets passed down, not in the blood, but it gets passed down from father to son to daughter. And no matter where you go in the world, apparently, you'll find that Germans predominate in where they're making pianos. And I guess that's true of beer and other things, and other groups, other things. The Swiss, maybe, watches.
Yes,
that's cultural, and we shouldn't shy away from acknowledging that. It's not racist or nativist or anything to say that. But some people in those, like in Argentina, somebody might say, "How come the Germans are dominating piano making?" Well, it's not, I'm pretty sure the government is not favoring the Germans in piano making. It's probably not the case. It's just that they have a comparative advantage in making pianos because it's in the family tradition.
Yeah, there's still very much that the business goes down from father to son. It's not unusual, certainly.
Yeah, it's maybe less so now. The internet certainly makes a big difference. Mass communications, even before the internet, it changes that. That has lessened, I'm sure, versus early 20th century and previously. I'm sure it's not the same. Nothing's the same.
Who are the main supporters of Israel at the time of its founding? I've heard that actually France was a major supporter of Israel in the beginning. Yeah,
and of course the British were. Of course, in 1917, if we go back a few years, you get the Balfour Declaration, which was Lord Balfour was the Foreign Secretary who writes a letter, which was basically written by the British Zionists like Weizmann to Lord Rothschild of the famous Rothschild family, saying that the king looks on with favor to the creation of a Jewish homeland. They didn't use the word state, of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, but it also said that the cultural and religious rights of the non-Jewish population should not be jeopardized. I thought that was pretty odd because Jews were only 10% of Palestine in 1917, and yet it refers to the non-Jewish population. It seems kind of odd saying, we look with favor on the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, where there's like 10% of the population. Yeah. But the non-Jewish population should still continue to enjoy their religious and cultural rights. It didn't say political rights. They said religious and cultural rights. So that's kind of interesting. That was passed by the British cabinet. The British cabinet, there was one person in the British cabinet who objected to the Balfour Declaration, and he condemned it as anti-Semitic. That secretary in the cabinet was named Sir Edwin Montagu. He was the only Jewish person in the cabinet, and he denounced. And you can find his letter. He put out a statement. You can find it online. I've written about it. He denounced the Balfour Declaration as anti-Semitic.
Yeah,
that's astounding. All the Gentiles in the cabinet passed it. Maybe they wanted the Jews to leave. The one Jewish person on the cabinet said, "This is anti-Semitic. I vote against it." People ought to read that story.
Yeah, that's something you hear a lot, and that's why and even apparently, the Nazis tried to collaborate. Well, we'll just send them all to Israel, because the Nazis.
I'm sure some British people were saying, you have a country now. Once Israel was founded, they probably said, or even before, you have a country now. Can I pack your bags? In other words, some people would have wanted the Jews to get out. I mean, kick them out. And here they had a country, so it made it nice and convenient. That's why Montague, I'm sure that's one of the reasons Montague also thought it would jeopardize the rights of Jews in other countries, right? Because people would say, what are you doing here? You have a country now. That was deadly. That was deadly.
Did Benjamin Disraeli ever say anything about Zionism?
He thought Jews were a race, and even though his family had converted, he always considered himself a proud member of the Jewish race. So that's pre-Hitler. So even before Hitler and the Nazis, people talked about it being a race. It's certainly not a race. I don't know. The first Zionists, I'm told, were actually Christians in the middle of the 19th century. The first ones were not Jewish because they had this, the fundamentalists had this biblical idea that Jesus will not make a second coming until all the Jews are in Jerusalem. And then if they haven't converted, they're going to, they won't be lifted up in the, what do they call it? What do they call that?
The rapture.
The rapture. Yeah.
What happens in Revelation. Yeah.
It was incumbent on these Christians to get all the Jews to Palestine, or else Jesus would not return. Now, the Jews, I guess, were the Zionists, because Zionism was a minority view among the Jews in the late 19th century and for a good part of the 20th century. For a while, it was minority view. So I don't want to say the Jews. The Zionists were willing to work with the Christian Zionists, even though the Christian Zionists really did not have their interests at heart. It wasn't about let's do justice for the Jews. It was like Jesus isn't coming back until we get all the Jews there. But they opportunistically used each other, I guess, and that's what got the ball rolling. And like I said, there were always Jewish critics of Zionism up until the very foundation of the state and beyond afterwards.
Yes, I know. And it seems like, and you saw today, like people like Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro that I've had on here.
Oh, he's fantastic. You've had him on the show? Oh, I love watching that guy. I've seen him on YouTube.
Well, it seems like most of the Zionists are what you'd call these non-religious Jews. It seems like, I mean, I guess in a way, Sheldon, you could say that Zionism has become its own religion.
Right. Although religion, I think, has made something of a comeback in Israel. So there are more and more, I mean, there are certainly secular Zionists, secular Israelis who are very pro, Jewish state. I don't know how they worked out the logic, but some of them are also very religious. Isn't Ben-Guiron, I believe, is who's in the cabinet, they're very religious, and the settlers on the West Bank, a lot of them who have come from Brooklyn, they're religious fanatics. They're not secular. There may be a secular element, but a lot of them are just crazy religious.
Well, yeah, that's one. I mean, that's the most fascinating thing about Israel today is that Israel is the one pro-Western country that is actually has birth rates that are well above sustaining the population. And I think it's mostly because you have these really Orthodox Jews who are having 5 or 6 kids, the Jews with the black hats and beards, I
believe their fertility rate is high. Right. The real Westerners, the ones that live in Tel Aviv, they're probably not having them kids. It's interesting. It's interesting for what it means. I mean, what kind of settlement can there be? 1 state, 2 states. I have a good friend. You've interviewed him, David Beto, who's pushing very hard with some people in Israel on some kind of Swiss canton, federation, which is an interesting idea. We'll see if anybody over there is interested in it. But what do we do? I mean, not that what do we do? I mean, I can't do anything, but what do people do over there? I take some heart in the fact that the Northern Ireland thing finally ended and apartheid in South Africa finally ended, and there weren't bloodbaths. So it gives me some hope that somebody in a future generation is going to work this thing out together. People on both sides, right? The Palestinian Arab side and the Jewish Israeli side. But I don't know what it's going to be, whether it's some kind of canton system
Yeah.
Sounds if they're for it, I'm for it. That's my position.
Well, apartheid ended, but now you look at what South Africa's become. It's just become like the rest of Africa.
Yeah, I haven't kept up with South Africa. I realized that Trump let in a bunch of people as refugees. When he was keeping out all other refugees, he let whites from South Africa come in and talked about oppression. And the president of South Africa said it's not true. So I haven't kept up with it. That's a different issue. I have too many issues I'm juggling. That's not. I don't want to get into that one.
Yeah, it's really. Yeah, certainly there's a lot of different things there. I don't know where we go from here. It does seem like Americans are just kind of getting sick and tired of all this. I don't know if there's any other motivation because it's.
Well, we do have over the years had to pay a lot.
Yeah. And I just like to point out, we were really doing just fine before Israel. In fact, we were doing quite well, probably better than we've done since the end of World War II.
Well, you mean Americans?
America, yeah, we were.
Yeah. I mean, look, I wasn't around. I wasn't born until '49, but they should have said after the war, because you had all the displaced people. Certainly true. That come to the U.S. But the point is the Zionist movement did not want them to have any place to go. The displaced Jews, who were in terrible shape after Hitler, they didn't want them to have any place to go but Palestine, and they worked against any kind of plan that would have enabled Jews to go someplace, even during the war.
Yeah,
to go someplace else, and that's a shameful thing because it seems like job one would be rescue the Jews from Hitler's conquests and get them out of there, no matter where, get them out of there. But there were, and Ben-Guiron, there were quotes that seem very damaging from Ben-Guiron about how, no, we only want them to go to Palestine.
Yeah.
That's terrible. That costs you, I'm sure that costs Jewish lives.
Yeah.
And we saw a replay of this when the Soviet Jews were starting to be able to get out. And the Soviet Union still existed in the 80s, I guess. They were getting out and going to Vienna, and from Vienna, which was, Austria was a free country. It was considered, it was in the West. Vienna was a free city. From Vienna, the Soviet Jews could go wherever they wanted. And a lot of them were coming to the U.S. because they wanted to come to the U.S. They knew about the American dream. Israel would have none of that. And so they were able to get the other countries to change the arrangements where the Soviet Jews had to go to Bucharest in, where's that, Romania. Not the free city, but Bucharest, which was part of the Soviet bloc.
Yeah, Bucharest, yeah.
There they could control them and channel them to Israel. That's unspeakable. They wanted to come to America. They should have been able to come to America.
And while there have been incidents like the lynching of Leo Frank and things like that, really, America has probably treated Jews better than any other country in the history of the world.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I've been thinking of. What I was going to say is there are people walking around saying anti-Semitism has never been greater in the United States than it is today, which I think is, total nonsense. Total nonsense. And when I'm in discussion with people that take this position, I want to say to them, yeah, do you recall all those pogroms in American history? Let's see, there was the Julius and Ethel Rosenberg pogrom. Oh, that was terrible. After they arrested and then executed Julius and Ethel Rosenberg for selling nuclear secrets to the Russians. Remember the pogrom? Oh, Jews were slaughtered. Oh, how about Jonathan Pollard? Remember after Jonathan Pollard sold all those secrets to Israel? He worked for the U.S. military. Remember the pogroms after that? How about Harvey Weinstein? Treated women terribly, notorious. Remember the pogroms after? These are all Jewish names, right?
Yes.
Remember the pogrom for that? Oh, how about and then who did you name? You named Frank. That goes back a little earlier.
Leo Frank. Yeah.
I missed a couple others, but the latest, of course, is Epstein.
Yes.
Here's a guy trafficking young girls, prostitutes, young underage. Brace yourself for the Epstein pogroms. Well, obviously, I'm being very sarcastic. There were no pogroms after any of that. That shows you how open and tolerant the American culture is. All these lefties that put down, the West and their racism and all this crap. Yes, there was racism earlier on, and there was certainly slavery, but there was slavery all over the world, but there weren't anti-slave societies all over the world. Only in the liberal West, England, and then the U.S. And so, this has been an amazingly tolerant society that's gotten more so. Obviously, you go back and you had Jim Crow, terrible stuff after slavery, which was terrible. But look at the progress all that time. And I'm only citing the things that Glenn Lowry talks about all the time, Thomas Sowell, Shelby Steele. I'm just really repeating things they say, but it's true.
Hey, Sheldon, you said you only had about an hour, and I didn't want to get to this.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I do.
Recently the Ed Crane passed away. He was a founder of the Cato Institute. That was a couple days ago. I just wanted to see if you had anything to say about Ed Crane.
Well, I've known Ed a long time. I met him shortly after he founded the Cato Institute and co-founded, I guess, with Charles Koch and Koch brothers in 1977 in San Francisco, but then they moved to Washington. So I knew him there. I worked with him when he was running the Ed Clark for President campaign in 1980. I worked for and I was in the DC area, so I would see him continuously at social events and seminars and stuff. I then worked for Cato in the early 90s for 5 years, so I actually worked for him. He is a giant in the architecture of the modern liberty movement. He is a giant. He did change, metaphorically and literally, he changed the skyline of Washington, D.C. They built a magnificent building to house a very important set of operations and programs, turning out great papers, great books, putting on great events. And it really made libertarianism a respectable part of the debate. He always liked to say, we need to be part of the debate. His dedication to professionalism, and let me throw someone else in here who died not that long ago, David Bowes, who was always, for a very long time, his second to Crane, working at Cato. Yeah. So dedicated to the professionalism, not just excellence in scholarship, but excellence in the quality of the appearance of the thing, the books, the papers. They made that top because they wanted to turn the libertarian movement into something very, very polished and professional. And, I can't sing their praises highly enough. And, Ed Crane is like right there. So I was saddened to hear that at 81, he passed away. I knew his wife. I guess I've met his kids over the years. I remember certainly when they were very small. They probably don't remember me. But I've been to his house many times. He used to have an annual thing where he would go to Alaska and catch a whole bunch of salmon with his friend Dick Randolph, who was a famous Libertarian Party guy and politician, and all that, and then bring the salmon back and have the famous Salmon Fest at the end of every summer, where invited a ton of people. This was, I think, an official Cato event. Invited a ton of DC area people to grilling the salmon, and it was great fun. We did it every year for many years.
Well, Sheldon, it's important to be a professional, but you also got to have some good parties.
Well, and of course, he was chairman of the Libertarian Party for many years.
Party in the sense of
those kinds of parties. He did that too. He also did a good New Year's Day party, which was really nice because after New Year's Eve, you hate when the holiday's over. He had a party on New Year's Day. And, great. But he was, I should mention the other kind of party. He was chairman of the Libertarian Party for I don't know how many years, but he again brought professionalism to the party. And he gave up a lucrative career in the bond trade. He was a bond trader, doing very well. And he, as a young man but was dedicated to liberty and said, I have enough money. I want to do this now. And he, first to really whip the Libertarian Party into shape. He ran the Clark for governor in California campaign, which I think got 5% in attention.
Yeah.
And then Clark ran for president. Crane was running the campaign. And they got 1%, but it was the best the party had done to that point. And it got it did get attention. you're not going to get people voting for a third party in great numbers.
Yeah. Well, the party,
overnight.
The Libertarian Party had a lot of positive momentum then, and I don't know if it ever really got it back. After the '83 walkout, the party's kind of been going sideways.
Well, I was one of the people that walked out. I was the national vice chairman from 81 to 83.
Yeah.
And then I was fed up with it in 83. I just thought they just wanted to be a debating society and talking to themselves. Unlike the Crane idea, which was the Crane approach, was to talk to the country, the real people, and get them interested in these ideas.
And then, and of course now today we have that wonderful man in Argentina who's really showing us how to do it.
Well, that's very interesting. He gave quite a speech at the WEF, didn't he? World Economic Forum.
Yes, and of course
he mentioned Rothbard. He mentioned Austrian other Austrian economists. Good for him.
Yeah, he met with Walter Block earlier this week. I think there's a picture. There's a picture of his staff all holding up Spanish translations of Defending the Undefendable. but the person he mentions the most of Americans, Israel Kirzner comes up in about every speech.
Entrepreneurship. I love Israel Kirzner. I met him many times. I'm not saying I knew him well, but and I just heard he just hit age 92, and he apparently is going strong.
Yeah,
saw that Peter Betke posted something on X yesterday. I believe it was the 92, maybe 94. I forget the exact number. He's getting up there in years, but I have huge admiration for Kirzner's work on entrepreneurship. He got his PhD under Mises, New York University, back in the 50s.
Yeah, well, and Milei is also, because he was the lead singer of a Rolling Stone cover band, I said, we got to call it rock star liberalism. We got to go out there and be rock stars instead of classic. Well, Sheldon, where can we find you out there?
Well, you can always find me at the Libertarian Institute, which is Libertarian Institute, .org. Every Friday, I have a column that I've been writing for many years, even before the Institute existed, called TGIF. That stands for the goal is freedom, but it happens to be on a Friday, so it's also thank goodness.
Yeah, the goal is freedom. Yes.
I'm also on Substack. Free Association is the name, because I also have a blog called Free Association, a blogger blog. So if you Google around, you'll find that. But all my stuff is on the Libertarian Institute, where you'll find other things besides me. The other two sites, you'll only find me. This you'll find a whole bunch of other people.
And you've got several other books on Amazon. So well, please like this show, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, check out my Substack, go buy my novel Escape from the Village, and people are giving me money to buy me a coffee. Thank you, Sheldon Richman.
Thank you. And glad we finally caught up with each other. We've been talking back and forth.
I'm Chris Baker. We're out. Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.